Hi, my dear Astro family. I hope you are doing well. Today we are going to be talking about a bit of relationship topics. And this inspired me to make this video because I read an article recently which I found in a way a bit funny, secondly, so true. I have been on dating websites as well for a while, and I always hear the very same story. So I'm really curious to hear what your opinion is, because what this article said was that, everyone is kind of like putting out something on these dating websites. I'm looking for someone honest, someone who wants to settle down, someone who is kind of like normal, not a weirdo, and so forth. And I want someone who is ready to commit. And obviously, these are kind of like the what we want to hear, right? And then once you get to the date and maybe you had a great time as well, but a week later, these are the sentences that they usually tell you. Oh, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I'm ready to get into relationship yet. I didn't feel that spark. It was a bit boring, or he just kind of didn't kind of catch my attention as much as I would have liked to. And then also they say that, oh, I'm focusing now on my professional, world, or I don't have much to offer right now. There is nothing wrong with you, but I feel like, I'm not ready for a relationship. So have you ever experienced these type of things? Because the other thing that I'm really experiencing is going on dates is that everyone loves to travel, everyone loves to read, everyone loves to go to the movies and stuff like that, or everyone wants to visit Thailand. But when you actually get there, like maybe 2 months down in the relationship, and then you bring up the idea, what if we went somewhere, just for the weekend and so forth? Oh, I don't know. I don't have the money. I don't want to go. I've got work commitments, and so forth. So, what it really tells me is that at the beginning of the relationship, everyone is trying to show their really bestest. But is it really good? Because in the long run, maybe we're gonna get disappointed. So, of course, there's a lot to kind of like talk about this. Even think about, for example, how much we tend to analyze text messages. Like, why did they send that emoji? Or why are they just replying with, just yes or no's? What does that really mean? And so forth. So there's a lot of analytical type of stuff going into a relationship as well. And of course, we are looking for the red flags. I think we all have got certain type of criteria as we want the partner to meet. So I'm not saying if the chemistry is missing there, then we should still try. But of course, everyone is going to be different in the first few months. So what if we looked at this from an astrological point of view? What would these, constellations, what would be the constellations that might indicate, for example, we get ghosted or we are going to be receiving all these type of answers? So firstly, by the way, if you would like to have a reading with me, then today is the day when you should be booking it because I've got 30% discount going on all my courses, webinars, as well as personal readings. And on top of that, you can even join my membership program if you would like to study with me because I'm doing a lot of webinars, something like these, where I explain the differences, for example, in certain houses, as well as I'll make educational tutorials so that you can improve your life. You can understand really your chart. There is a lot of psychological as well as practical tips of how you can manage your own chart. But let's just get into this really interesting topic because when it comes to relationship, we tend to be focusing a lot maybe on the seventh house and the fifth house. But are these the only houses to focus on? And of course, the answer is no. So when it comes to the fifth house, yes, it's going to be very important because that's the house of playground. That's what you're gonna go on date with. That shows pretty much the honeymoon period of your relationship. This is where the dating begins. It's the house of Leo, joy, creativity, the house of the chase, basically. So the vibe of this house is quite high energy, those butterflies in the stomach, Just think of a date. You're gonna dress up, you're gonna put on a show, you're gonna put a makeup on, and so forth, because you are trying to show the best version of yourself. Because the fifth house is quite a kingly energy, it represents the stage. So, of course, we are going to be showing something that we potentially are not. I would call this house as the Instagram phase. You go to a nice dinner, you laugh at each other's jokes. Everything feels like a bit of a movie. The trap here is that we can get addicted to that fifth house rush. When the initial excitement, the spark dips, they assume the relationship is actually dead. So, because the fifth house is all about self-expression, you are seeing how you feel when you are with them rather than who they truly are. Now, the seventh house is the house of relationship, the mirror, the way we relate to others, the way we form a partnership. So I would call it as the house of transition from the dating to become more serious. This is the house where me becomes us. So it is the house of Libra, which represents balance, legal or formal agreement as well. The vibe of this house is a lot of compromise, routine, equality. So this mask from the fifth house start to slip basically. This is when you decide to be exclusive. You deal with boring things, whose turn is it to cook, for example, how to handle disagreement, meeting the family. So this is a transitional house where, this is where the red flags usually hit. In the fifth house, that quirk is cute. In the seventh house, the same quirk is kind of like negotiations. What else would I be looking at? Surely I would be looking at the eighth house. And I think this is actually a very crucial part of a relationship reading because this is where you merge. This is where the soul bond happens. This is the deep end of the pool. It is the house of Scorpio. So we start sharing karma together, shared resources, the shared intimacy, and then we transform together. Yes, the vibe of this house is all about all or nothing, vulnerability, secrets, the psychological stripping as well. This is the ugly side of love. It's supporting someone through a crisis, sharing a bank account, revealing your darkest fears. It is where the ego goes to die so that the union can live. The scary part is that this is why people ghost. The eighth house requires you to give up control. If you aren't ready to truly be seen, with your flows, for example, then it can become kind of like a threat to others. So these are some of the most important part of a relationship reading, or this is what generally people would look at. Maybe the fifth house, seventh house, surely, but the eighth house often is a little bit overlooked by others. But I would definitely look at the third and the 11th house as well, because they do play a key role in your relationships. While while the fifth house, seventh house, and eighth house deals with the depth and the structure of romance, the third house and the 11th house are kind of like the connective tissue of our social lives. Without them, a relationship has no air to breathe. I mean, remember, if you go on a date, you're going to have to be able to talk. At one point, you're going to have to be attending social events, for example, with your partner. You're going to have to introduce them to your friends. And potentially, you are going to be even sharing some of those friends as well. So I would look at the third house from a relationship point of view as the bridge. It's the house of Gemini. So this is about the small talk, the texting habits, the immediate environment. This is about curiosity, the banter, the neighborhood vibes as well. This is the type of house where you ask, what did you have for lunch? Look at this funny meme stage. It's the constant stream of data between two people. And I think this is, from a modern struggle point of view, this is where the overthinking happens. because we treat the third house mechanics, how long it takes to text back and so forth. Uh, it's kind of like the soul test to that relationship. So if the third house connection isn't there, most likely the relationship will feel super heavy anyway, because you need to be able to talk as peers before you can merge as partners. So when you look at the third house and the eighth house, they are actually six sign away from each other. So that's the unhealthy type of communication. If the communication is not there, unfortunately, relationships might fall down significantly. Why would I look at the 11th house? Well, the 11th house is the house of Aquarius, and it's about the groups, the dating pools, the circle of friends, our shared hopes for the future. So this is how you act when you are out with a group of friends. It's the can I take this person to my company party, for example, type of house. This is the dating group house. When we talk about the market, the state of men, women today, we are looking through the lens of the 11th house. And I think every great long-term relationships needs an 11th house foundation. The feeling that you are kind of like best friends or we are on the same so-called team, regarding our goals, social life, and so forth. So I believe these are also super important. When people say there are no normal people left, in those dating applications, Facebook groups, they are stuck somehow in the negative 11th house loop. And therefore, you would need to be checking out what is happening with your 11th house. They then go on a date and try to force a third house interaction, which is kind of like the house of interviews, to prove an eighth house soulmate connection exists. But it's just too much of a pressure, right? So I think we can use the third house to stay curious about others. We can use the 11th house to treat them like a friend first. And then we can use the fifth house spark when naturally, without demanding, it be a seventh house marriage contract by, the second date and so forth. So I want to give you some scenarios here, like we did, for example, in the financial videos as well. So imagine that the third house ruler in hard aspect to the fifth house ruler. I would call it as the communication killer, the texting trap type of archetype. You know, the planet governing your daily talk, logic, your environment is clashing with that planet governing your romance, fun, and self-expression. So maybe we have a great time in person, but the texting is a disaster, or you overanalyze every single emoji, or they take 10 hours to reply. It does kill the romantic momentum, and the romantic momentum is the fifth house. Or you go on a date, but instead of flirting, which the fifth house would like to do, you end up in a dry intellectual debate. It's kind of like a job interview style interrogation. And you try to be funny or edgy, which is also a fifth house type of topic, but they take it literally or they get offended. And that could be the third house. You know, I mean, imagine that from a modern dating point of view, with this constellation, maybe someone would say, we had such a spark, but then he sent this weird text, and now I'm over it. Now, another scenario, if the fifth house ruler in hard aspect to the seventh house, the planet of chase and fun is at odds with the planet of the contract, the partnership planet. So this is someone who might get stuck in kind of like in that forever dating loop. You find people who are amazing for a 3 month whirlwind romance. But as soon as the talk turns into kind of like, what are we? Do we have a future? Then we might panic and we might leave. And this could be also the wrong type of syndrome. So you can be attracted to bad boys and girls or, that unpredictable types with the fifth house. but you actually need a stable, boring partner for a long-term life. And you've been picking or you keep picking that fifth house player type of archetype because subconsciously you might know that they are not going to sign a seventh house lease anyway, which is of course a marriage contract. And or this could be even an archetype. It's kind of like the fun killer archetype. As soon as we get married or as soon as we commit, the romance dies and you feel like the relationship has become kind of like a chore or set of rules rather than joy. So from a modern dating point of view, I would say that, oh, it was magical at first, but then it became too serious, heavy, and I kind of like lost interest. Another scenario is 11th house ruler in hard aspect to the 7th house ruler. And I would say that this could be the archetype of a social saboteur or kind of like the friend zone. I mean, imagine that your social circle is clashing with your one-on-one partnership, or you kind of feel like a public pressure here. Your friends hate your partner, or your partner doesn't fit into your social world, or you feel torn between your tribe and the one, basically. Or the 11th house usually have got quite a high ideas as well, or of what a partner should be like. Political values, status, hobbies, the sign is going to be determining that. But no real human in the seventh house can actually meet that criteria. So again, this might be just kind of like, we go on a date, but we create that friend zone type of stuff. Um, so these are some of the scenarios. Now, when the third and the fifth house rulers aren't talking, or kind of like in a bad talk, we can kill the romance with words. When the seventh and the fifth house are fighting, we kill the commitment with a search for a better spark. And the better spark is always a very Neptunian trait. So imagine that combination Neptune belongs to, but I'm going to speak about them in a short while. And then maybe you can think of the ghosting because of the seventh house compatibility issue, or just a third house texting misunderstanding. It's worth kind of like thinking about that. Think of another scenario. What if the 11th house ruler in hard aspect to the fifth house ruler? So the planet of social circle and your ideas is clashing with the planet of personal joy or romance. So this is kind of like the Instagram relationship. You pick partners based on how they will look to your friends or your tribe, but when you are actually alone with them, there is no genuine fun or shared hobby. So not being on the same wavelength. I mean, usually this happens with youngsters, I would say, but do let me know in the chat box below if you have got 11th and 5th house connections and how that applies to you. Or, other way of thinking about this is that you are so focused on being cool or a good friend in your social groups that you suppress your romantic or even sexual spark. And then people just end up seeing you as their kind of best friend. This is often an indication where actually a male and a female become really good friends. And one might want a little bit more than the other, but I'm just a cool friend in a way. Or you share too much of your dating life with your online groups or friends, and then it becomes kind of like a red flag for others as well. It's kind of like the scenario when someone is perfect on paper, even your friends kind of love him, but just I don't feel anything when we are alone. But we might feel super good when we are out there, among people. I mean, imagine if the eighth house ruler in hard aspect to the third house ruler, then the planet of psychology, the secret, is kind of like at odds with the planet of communication and logic. So imagine that on the first or the second date, you skip the small talk and dive straight into your deepest traumas and psychological wounds. And this can create a very intense but unstable bond, and it might be scaring the other person away. Or you overanalyze a very simple text message like, hey, how are you? And you're looking for those hidden, dark, or manipulative meanings where none exist, basically. I mean, because they usually send, hey, how are you, with a smiley face. And then now there is no smiley face there. So this is kind of like the suspicious texter archetype. And maybe you can talk about anything, but the moment shared resources or money comes up, the communication can actually shut down with this aspect also. Even I would say that if the seventh house ruler is in hard aspect to the 12th house is often the love triangle house. And I've made quite a couple of webinars on that, why the 12th house would be connected to such things. The planet of commitment and partnership, which is the seventh house, is clashing with the planet of solitude, the unconscious, the planet of undoing. So this could create a savior complex, attracting people who are unavailable, unreliable, if unavailable physically, emotionally, or even legally. You are trying to build a partnership with someone who is essentially kind of like a ghost. And or you might have got a great partner, but you feel kind of like this urge to escape or to be alone. And this could really talk to us about self-sabotage as well, because once the relationship becomes solid, your subconscious fears trigger a behavior that ruins it, like ghosting or picking a fight without even knowing why. Obviously, if it's Mars, then it's going to be more about picking a fight. The ghosting could be, for example, Jupiter or Neptune related stories. So, you know, so a bit of a summary here. Relationships aren't just seen by the seventh house, but it includes multiple factors. Even aspect from the generational planets to the ruler of these houses can indicate trouble as well. So a relationship is really a multi-layered kind of ecosystem, not a single point in our chart. And therefore, I would definitely look at a lot of other factors also. Like I mentioned, the generational planets. So, if a seventh house ruler is in aspect to Pluto, that's often obsessive or magnetic. You don't just date someone, you become consumed by them. There is often the theme of control, jealousy, secrets happening, and you might even attract very intense partners who want to own you, or you might be the one who tries to fix and transform the other person. If a seventh house ruler or any of these houses really connect to Neptune, often there's the rose-colored glasses. We over-idealize partners, or we tend to show more than what we are, and then we can fall in love with the version of them that doesn't even exist. And that this could lead to ghosting. Or if any of these houses are connected to Uranus, that's kind of like the roller coaster type of archetype. So sudden starts, sudden stops, freedom searching, it's a lightning ball type of attraction. It's really electric at the beginning. At the beginning, it really feels normal or stuff like that. But then all of a sudden, I've got that feeling I want to be free again. So these are the archetypes where someone is going to tell you, I'm not ready for a relationship yet, and so forth. Another thing that I would like to say is that when you go on these dating websites, the text message that we tend to share with others is very much about Saturn. Like not the text message, but the descriptions of what we are looking for. Because potentially, some people go on these dating websites because of Saturnian reasons. And the Saturn is about stability. Saturn is the exalted ruler of Libra. But as soon as we get to know them, many are going to act like Uranus, which is obviously the freedom loving lifestyle. Often we just want a one night stand and so forth. And of course, we all get somehow disappointed, right? And I think Mercury plays a very important role in a relationship because while back in the days, the meeting point was important, And therefore Mercury dominated quite significantly. Nowadays, Mercury is important, but we tend to be analyzing the emojis, how long it takes to reply to us, the tone of voice, the body language, and that becomes a continuous mental kind of like noise in our head, which might be completely killing our intuition. Often we are looking for someone by what they say or what they write rather than looking at their own action. I think often actually ghosting might be happening with Pluto and the moon because I'm not ready for a relationship. With Pluto moon, often people can disappear, for example, and Pluto talks to us about fears. The fear of losing control, the fear of intimacy. And in modern relationship you know, or searching for that one, the moon plays a very significant role because it's about emotional security. And then when moon is hurt, then often we just kind of give up on love. And when it is connected to Pluto, with Moon and Pluto, we might treat someone rather than a soul, we treat them as an object. Um, I would say that even with Neptune, often I would call it as the kind of like the interview type of segment of our love life. Because at the beginning of dating or getting to know someone, there is that little mystical stuff. There is that fog there. And everyone is going to show their bestest face. We are going to be putting extra makeup on. We are not going to be farting in front of the other person, you know. And often this is a conscious lie that we do with Neptune, right? And then a couple of months down the line, we are going to change. When that pink fog disappears and the reality sets in, then some people aren't going to be able to, deal with this disappointment, and they start kind of like, walking away from a relationship, or they are going to press the next button, flipping on Tinder and whatever. So Neptune is the grass is greener on the other side type of archetype, and we are always going to be looking for someone else. So I do hope that this video helps you to understand a little bit deeper how, you should be looking at your own chart from a relationship point of view. Do let me know in the chat box below how you feel about this and what your experience is. And do you have some of these aspects actually in your chart? And what type of experiences have you had? And do you actually go on dating website, or you have given up on it completely? Because I think everyone is trying to get to know someone on dating websites nowadays. Just going to a shop or meeting someone at the gym is getting like more rare, right? So, yeah, can we actually give up on dating website? I don't know. Do let me know. But I'm also looking for the one. So, you are not alone. So thank you for being here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe potentially share the video with others as well. It would be much appreciated. And if you would like to have a reading with me, study with me, then check out on my website, AstroViktor.com. Thank you and see you soon. Bye-bye.